Good morning. In our last shiur, we mentioned that one of the methods that we are taught to use to connect to Hashem is by utilizing the metaphor of lights, even though God is not a light, but by using light as a metaphor to enable us to get a certain level of understanding of God. And then the Biyam Darkecha continues in this appendix to say there's another way, and that is by thinking of the letters of the Shem Havaya of Yud K Vav K. That by focusing and contemplating on the four-letter name of Hashem, that's another methodology by which we are permitted to connect to Hashem. That's why in many shuls they even have the famous shivisi standing in front of the chazan, because even though in the spiritual realms there are no letters, and God is not those four letters, still, by contemplating those letters that are God's revelation that He is the one who brought existence into being. And again, even though those letters are not Him, but that's a method by which we can enter into connecting to Him. And all of the works of Kabbalah are replete with discussions about these lights and these names, because that is the method through which the Shekhinah revealed itself to the Nevi'im, to the prophets, and to those with Ruach HaKodesh. And that's how they're able to get a grasp of what's going on in the spiritual realms. But he emphasizes, and the truth of the matter is, he goes on for several pages emphasizing the next point. I'm going to skip most of it because it does get a little bit repetitive, but this is a point that cannot be stated enough, because this is something which is a very common mistake among people who try to study Kabbalah, that you have to realize that we cannot imagine God as being any of these physical metaphors, not the lights and not the letters that form His names, because none of these things exist in the spiritual realms. They're only tools to get us to the point where we can understand deeper. And he mentions also that other metaphors used for God, such as when the Torah uses anthropomorphic descriptions of God's behavior, those contemplating of those is not the method by which to approach an understanding of God. And again, after skipping a couple of pages, he goes on to say that after we use the methodologies of lights as a handle and contemplating God's name, then we can end up starting to feel His spiritual existence. And again, I want to reference back to something I mentioned in the first shiur on the Otzros Chaim. I'm going to repeat again what I said then, especially for those who didn't hear this shiur, but it's sort of like describing to somebody, what does love mean? And the fact of the matter is, there's no words that you can really use to explain what love is or why you love somebody else. Okay, if you say, well, I love him because he's my child, it doesn't answer the question. Okay, I love him because he makes me happy. That doesn't answer the question either. So the most we can do is give certain descriptions around the topic, and then hope that the person who is listening is able to take all of those metaphors and discussions that are around the topic, and therefore develop and find that feeling within inside themselves. So it's the same thing when it comes to using names of Hashem, using lights as a metaphor. All these are signposts But at the end of the day, a person has to get to a place where he doesn't need the lights anymore. He doesn't need the names because those have already pointed to something that he has found within his heart. Each person in his own way, and depending upon his depth and level of understanding Kabbalistic concepts. Because even though the very nature of Hashem is not something that human beings have the ability to grasp, still each of us can get a little bit of the revelation of God in our own way. And to the extent that they were able to grasp and feel God's existence, that's a real thing. And it should be something that's not dependent upon any physical metaphor whatsoever. But it's a feeling that comes together with a clarity, which is above and beyond anything that can be shared intellectually. And when we get to that level, then we have the ability to truly communicate with God. I don't mean as a prophet, but I'm talking right now, although if you can get to prophecy, great. But I'm talking mainly in terms of being able to daven properly and to understand what God is saying to you through the words of tefillah and the words of Torah. But the first thing we need to do is move beyond the metaphors. Because as long as we are stuck in the world of the metaphors, then we are by very definition limited in any concept that we could have of who God is.